Now, Bloomberg understands G7 leaders meeting in southern Italy are set to reach a deal to provide Ukraine with $50 billion of aid using profits generated by frozen Russian assets. A French official says technical details of the agreement will be hashed out at the summit. Let's bring in Bloomberg's Oliver Crook, who is there in Bari. And Oliver, there are loads of items on the G7 agenda for this meeting, but maybe let's just start with this Bloomberg reporting about what they potentially have decided to do on those frozen Russian assets and what that would unlock for Ukraine in terms of economic assistance.
Right, Jemana. So this has been the debate for a couple of months now, how to basically tap the value of those Russian assets without seizing the underlying assets, which the Europeans have been very resistant to do, though the Americans have been pushing for, and while actually front-loading that cash to Ukraine. So again, we've been talking about sums at about $50 billion. And what it's looking like now, the agreement that's coalescing, is will be done in the sort of form of a loan that's going to be backed by a number of the G7 nations, mostly by the United States, but topped up by others. And that gets sort of pushed out to Ukraine. And then that loan gets eventually repaid over time with the profits from those frozen assets that sit mostly here in Europe. The sort of devil, as ever, is in the detail. They have not worked out the details here. They're, in fact, according to the sources that we've been speaking to, don't necessarily intend to have a full sort of have fully worked out the mechanics of how this works at this meeting, but they're hoping to disperse it by the end of the year, that 50 billion euros that is desperately needed by Ukraine as it continues to fend off the attacks from Russia. Now, some of the other topics here, obviously, is also going to be how do you cinch the sort of money that is still flowing into the Russian war machine. This will be a topic here. But of course, also, Jemana, as we think about the sort of bipolar world that has sort of been developing with this sort of axis with China, Russia versus sort of the G7, they've also decided to bring a lot of other leaders in from Turkey, from UAE, from Brazil, Argentina, India, all trying to sort of bring them together onto this side. And of course, Jemana, let's not forget the Pope. We've been talking about AI. He's a part of a session on artificial intelligence tomorrow, the first ever Pope to have joined a G7 meeting.
Oh, wow. I was not aware of that. I did know that the Argentinian President Milei was also going to give a speech on AI. I didn't realize the Pope was getting involved as well. But Oliver, look, many of the leaders attending G7 are European leaders, and we know that we just had those European elections, a surge from the far right. You see the likes of Chancellor Scholz in Germany and a diminished capacity. Obviously, President Macron, we've all been watching what has been happening over and politically on the ground in the last 24 hours. A lot of turmoil there. To what extent are domestic issues going to sort of supersede or, take precedence over some of the G7 priorities here?
I mean, listen, I think the domestic issues and the political situations in a lot of these countries basically undermines not only the sort of attention that leaders can give to the summit, but also their sort of legitimacy in a certain way, their mandate, right? And it's not just the sort of EU elections. I mean, we have Rishi Sunak facing an election in less than a month. We have in Canada and Japan very sort of low approval ratings for the government there. Of course, Biden facing his election. I mean, it's crystallized when it comes to Scholz and Macron. Macron, who's basically running a full-fledged election campaign, just yesterday. Now he shows up here today to sort of deal with sort of global issues with Marine Le Pen sort of nipping at his heels. And then you have Scholz, who basically yesterday we had Zelensky in the parliament. We had a number of lawmakers from the AfD who did so well in those European elections who basically just boycotted Zelensky's speech and sort of sent sort of very scathing messages about sort of German support. So he's getting undermined at all sides. And again, Jumana, what we sort of bring into focus here is the host of the G7, really the only leader who has been really reinforced in their mandate by those EU elections, Giorgia Meloni.